Neighbors are supposed to make us feel safe, but sometimes, they're the ones you should fear the most. Here are 3 creepy true neighbor horror stories that will make you look twice at the house next door. When I first moved to that small, quiet town, I thought I had finally found peace. The house I bought was nothing special, just a modest little place on the outskirts, where the roads were almost always empty and silence filled the nights. It felt more like a countryside neighborhood than part of a city, and honestly, I liked that. I wasn't a very social person, and I figured the stillness would suit me. A few days after moving in, I was still surrounded by unpacked boxes when I heard a knock at my front door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I hesitated before answering. Standing there was a tall man, maybe in his late 50s, with streaks of gray in his black hair and a patchy beard that didn't quite fill in. He introduced himself with a warm smile as Todd, my neighbor from a few houses down. He welcomed me to the neighborhood, asked me the usual small talk questions, where I'd moved from, what I did for work, whether I lived alone. At the time, nothing about it struck me as odd. He said he lived with his wife, Sarah, and that they loved how quiet the town was. His friendliness seemed genuine enough, and I appreciated the effort. When he left, I thought, well, at least I know one person here now. Over the next week, though, I started noticing something strange. No one else ever seemed to be outside. No kids on bikes, no families on porches, not even anyone mowing their lawns. The neighborhood had this hollow, lifeless feeling, like the houses were just shells without people inside them. The silence that had felt peaceful at first began to feel heavy, almost depressing. Then one afternoon around 4, Todd showed up at my door again. He said he and Sarah were hosting a dinner that night at 7:30 and that a bunch of neighbors would be there. He thought it'd be a great chance for me to meet everyone. I was surprised everything I'd seen suggested people here kept to themselves. But this seemed like my one chance to break through the loneliness. I agreed, thanked him for the invitation, and promised I'd be there. By 7:30, I was both nervous and hopeful. I got dressed, walked down the dark, silent street, and made my way to Todd's house. From the outside, nothing looked unusual. In fact, it looked a little too quiet. No cars in the driveway. No voices or music coming from inside. Still, the front door was cracked open slightly. I knocked anyway, and Todd's voice called from somewhere inside, "Come on in. Make yourself at home." The echo of his voice bounced through the halls. No chatter, no clinking dishes, no sound of a crowd. Just his voice, and then silence. I stepped inside cautiously. The house was dim, lit with only a few low lamps that cast long shadows across the walls. I followed the sound of his voice toward the kitchen, but when I got there, the room was empty. The table was bare, no food, no chairs set up, no signs of any dinner party. My chest tightened as realization sank in. There was no gathering. There were no other neighbors. This whole thing had been a lie. I called out, "Todd?" but got no answer. And then, suddenly, the front door slammed shut. The echo rattled through the house, making my heart lurch. I hurried back to the hallway, and sure enough, the door was locked. Not just once, 3 separate locks sealed it. Someone had locked me inside. From somewhere deeper in the house, I heard Todd's voice again. But this time, it wasn't cheerful or welcoming. It was low, deliberate, and chilling. "Where are you going?" he called, his footsteps starting to close the distance. "You just got here." Panic surged through me. My hands fumbled over the locks as his footsteps grew louder, closer. His voice lost all pretense of friendliness, turning sharp and predatory. I yanked the last lock open just as I felt his presence closing in behind me. Without looking back, I threw the door open and bolted into the night. My legs carried me faster than I thought I could run, all the way back to my own house. Inside, I locked every door and window, my chest heaving. A part of me didn't want to believe what just happened, but the terror in my gut told me it was real. I called the police. When they came, Todd was nowhere to be found. But minutes later, he showed up at my house, banging on my windows, peering inside with wild, angry eyes. He left before the cops arrived. And here's the worst part: after questioning him, the police discovered Todd had lied about everything. He never had a wife. He never planned a dinner. He'd lived alone for over a decade. Everything he said was just a story, a setup to lure me into his house. But because he never physically harmed me, the police couldn't do anything. I moved away as soon as I could, but I still checked the news sometimes, searching his name. Because I know deep down I wasn't supposed to walk out of that house alive. I grew up in a quiet neighborhood where most of the families had lived for decades. My parents had passed the house down to me when they moved away, and by the time this happened, I had been living there on my own for 3 years. I liked the stability of it: same houses, same neighbors, the same familiar streets. That was, until a new guy moved into the house directly across the street. He seemed ordinary enough when I first saw him unloading boxes from a U-Haul. I wasn't the type to introduce myself right away, so I left him alone. I figured I'd meet him eventually. But that meeting came in a way I never expected. One night, about a week after he'd moved in, I pulled into my driveway after work. That's when I saw him. The new neighbor was standing on the sidewalk in front of my house. He wasn't walking past, wasn't approaching the door, just standing there, staring at it. By the time I got out of my car and started toward him, he was gone. Vanished. It couldn't have been more than 20 seconds, but he'd slipped away as if he knew I was coming. The whole thing unsettled me, but I brushed it off. Maybe he was just taking a late-night stroll and it looked worse than it was. The next morning, I grabbed my mail and happened to glance across the street. His house was quiet, blinds drawn, no lights. But just before I looked away, I saw something move. The blinds in the upstairs window shifted, like someone had just been standing there, watching me. I froze. My gut twisted. Still, I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe he was just curious about his new neighbor. That night, I tried to relax. I put on Netflix, did some chores, and told myself I was being paranoid. But just before bed, I peeked outside one last time. My blood ran cold. He was standing at the end of my driveway. The way he stood, motionless, shoulders stiff, made me think he hadn't just arrived there. He'd been closer. Maybe even right up at my door, until I caught him. I walked outside, trying not to sound angry. I called out, asked if everything was okay. But as soon as he saw me, he turned and walked down the sidewalk, pretending like he was out for a casual stroll. I called again, louder this time, but he ignored me. That's when I realized it wasn't a misunderstanding. He wasn't curious. He was watching me. I went to bed uneasy, and sometime past midnight, I woke up in a cold sweat. My heart was racing, and I didn't know why. The house was silent. I tried to shake it off, but the feeling wouldn't go away. I got up, put my ear to the bedroom door, and listened. At first, nothing. Then, faintly, the floor creaked. My pulse spiked. I crouched down and peeked under the gap of the door. The hallway outside was dark and empty. I waited. And then, movement. A shadow passed across the crack, cutting off the light. I stumbled back, trying not to make a sound, but the creaking stopped instantly. He'd heard me. Seconds later, heavy footsteps moved toward my room, stopping right outside. I stared at the bottom of the door in horror as two dark shapes appeared, the boots of someone standing just inches away. And then, slowly, the bottom of the door went black. He was lying on the floor, looking under the door. I saw his eye, staring back at me. I bolted across the room, grabbed my phone with shaking hands, and dialed 911. As I whispered to the operator, I could hear him moving again, pacing, thumping around outside the room. Then, silence. By the time police arrived, the house was empty. But when they went across the street to question him, the neighbor was awake, wide-eyed, like he'd been waiting. He slipped up, mentioning details he couldn't have possibly known, like which room I slept in. That was enough to bring him in. The investigation revealed he'd been watching me long before I noticed. His computer search history had my name in it dozens of times, even before he moved in. There was a very real chance he relocated to that house just to be near me. The police said he had a record of stalking cases, but they never figured out why he targeted me specifically, or what he planned that night inside my house. To this day, I can't shake the image of his eye staring at me from under the door. I was one locked handle away from never waking up again. I used to live in a small apartment building on the edge of the city. It wasn't anything fancy, just 3 floors, 12 units, the kind of place where most tenants kept to themselves. I worked long hours and liked the privacy. But that all changed when a woman moved in across the hall from me. The first time I saw her, I thought she looked off. She was in her mid-30s, pale, with jet black hair that hung down in messy strands. Her eyes were wide, almost too wide, and when she looked at me, it was like she was staring straight through me. Still, I nodded politely. She didn't smile back. A few nights later, around 5 a.m., I woke up to knocking. Slow, deliberate knocks. When I opened the door, she was standing there barefoot in a faded nightgown. Her expression was blank. She tilted her head slightly and whispered, "You should come over after work." Then she turned and went back into her apartment without another word. I told myself she was lonely, maybe unstable, and tried to shrug it off. But the next morning, it happened again. Same knock. Same phrase. Same blank stare. This went on for days. Always at the same hour. Always the same request. By the end of the week, I was unnerved. I started avoiding her completely. If I heard her in the hallway, I'd wait until she was gone. But she always seemed to know when I was home. One night, I came back late from work. My apartment door was unlocked. I was sure I'd locked it that morning, but the deadbolt slid open too easily. My stomach sank as I pushed inside. The air felt heavier, the way it does when someone else has been in the room. I checked the kitchen, the bathroom, the living room, nothing. Finally, I stepped into my bedroom, and my blood ran cold. She was standing next to my bed. The woman from across the hall. Her hair was draped over her face, her nightgown filthy, and in her hand, she clutched a kitchen knife. She didn't speak. She just stared at me, breathing slow and heavy, like she'd been waiting for me. I backed out of the room, my hand groping for the doorknob, but when I twisted it, the door wouldn't open. The lock had been rigged. I realized then she had planned this. She stepped closer, dragging the knife across the bedsheet, leaving a thin tear in the fabric. The sound of the blade slicing made my chest tighten. My only thought was survival. I grabbed the nearest object, a lamp, and swung it at her with everything I had. The glass shattered across her shoulder, and she screamed, dropping the knife. I didn't wait. I tackled her out of the way, yanked the door hard until the broken mechanism gave, and sprinted into the hall. I pounded on my neighbor's door and screamed until the police arrived. They found her sitting calmly in my bedroom, rocking back and forth, humming a tune I didn't recognize. When they arrested her, she didn't fight. She just kept repeating the same words she'd whispered to me every morning, "You should come over after work." Later, I learned she had a history of mental illness and had been off her medication for weeks. She'd been evicted from her last apartment for breaking into a neighbor's unit. No one at my building knew because the landlord had rushed to fill the vacancy. The police told me I was lucky. If I had come home just a little later, she might have been waiting in the dark with that knife already raised. I moved out of that apartment the next month. But even now, years later, I still wake up sometimes to the sound of phantom knocking. Slow, deliberate knocks. And in those moments, I swear I can hear her whispering outside my door. "You should come over after work." Neighbors can be friendly, but sometimes, they turn into your worst nightmare. Fearful face. Which of these 3 true stories creeped you out the most? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more horror stories, and share it with friends who love a good scare.